morning. Welcome to Commission Workshop. It is, what is today? The 6th? It is 9 a.m.
After Cinco de Mayo.
That's right, that's right. We have with us today Commissioner Luke, Vice Mayor.
Margarita hangover day.
We have that too.
Sorry.
Vice Mayor McDowell, myself, Mayor Hanks. We have City Attorney Slayton. We have City Manager Lear. Looky here. Look who else we got standing up here. We got Dawn. But anyways, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Newkirk, would you mind?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a follow-up meeting to the one we had a few months ago regarding the neighborhood expansion program. There were some questions asked of staff, so without belaboring it anymore, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Newkirk and his team that are here to give you that information.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager. A good friend of mine gave me a slogan that I just want to share. It's very short, but it was pretty neat when I read it and kept reading it, that it may be just a good way to start off this meeting. At one time, a mayor from New Orleans once said, 300 years from now, when historians look back, they remember how we, the people of Northport, in this moment and in this time, came together to do what was hard for the sake of what was right, and gave life and freedom, goodness and life to those generations we do not yet know. This is our mission. This is our responsibility. It is our burden, but it is a sweet burden. And I'm thankful, as we all should be, that we have been given the chance, the opportunity to bear this burden for those yet to come. This is a decision on neighborhood expansion. So it is a tough decision. My favorite saying that I've used for years and years is you get everyone's attention when you hit their pocketbook. So with that being said, for their children. On January the 14th, we presented the concept of extending water and wastewater to properties that are not currently served, and you gave us direction to bring back some data on several of the items. Let me just start out by saying, this is not a discussion about extending services to one area. This is a planning discussion on how we can mitigate our long-term impact on the environment of our city and our surrounding watersheds. Directly or indirectly, we are all responsible for the impact of the city's very sensitive environment. The impact of septic tanks have been recognized by the state and by scientific communities. Of the many communities that General Development Corporation began, Northport is one of, if not the only unincorporated city to come up with a plan to deal with this environment. Some of those other communities were Port LaBelle, Port Charlotte, Port St. John, Palm Bay, Port St. Lucie, Sebastian Heights, Delta Key, and Key Biscayne. Now, the slide that is up there right now is a very impressive slide. There are about 45,000 unserved properties right now that are left out there, 45,000. Of that, over 16,000 are already occupied, which is 1/3. So out of the 45,000, there's already 16,000 septic tanks in there. That's what the yellow dots represent, how spread out it is.
16,000 have septic tanks on them?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, 16,332. Now, under the heading of septic tanks in Wikipedia, the author states that septic tanks by themselves are ineffective at removing nitrogen compounds that have the potential to cause algae blooms in our waterways. You can understand that if the leaders of the time had their crystal ball, and I wish I would have brought my little ball and I would have tapped it right now and it would have lit up, and could see into the future, that they would have implemented regulations to not allow this many septic tanks in such a small area. But in 1972, the federal law and the Clean Water Act was amended in many respects to recognize the need for planning to address these problems, which are caused by non-point source pollution. That same year, the public health law of the state of Florida was also amended to no longer allow platting of lots without provisions for central services. But since the city was plotted before January 1st, 1972, the current regulations did not apply, and private homeowners have a vested right to build, and currently allowing for well and septic systems on their property. So those first two slides, the one that was all red and this one with the yellow dot, show the existing homes. Now, there were several topics that at the January 14th meeting that you requested for us to bring back some information on it. It was to speak about a theory of wood chips, septic tank inspections, fees and cost for the hookup, grant funding, financing systems, hybrid connections, and new construction and expansion into the commercial areas of Northport, which we have put together. So today we've broken this down with several members of my excellent staff. We put some time into this, and we just want to present the findings for that. And first up to speak on the wood chip subject is Michael Acosta, my utilities engineer manager. With that, Michael.
Can I ask a question on something that you spoke of? You talked about the 1972 regulation. Didn't it set forth for the future? I mean, did it just say that anything that was planned? I mean, to me, they should have put something in there for the future so that infrastructure could have been put in according to their standards.
I will let Jennifer DeRozier come on up to the table here, Jen.
Especially because we annexed a lot of properties in 2000, I mean, well, between 1972 and currently.
That's correct. So the regulations that were put into place were in effect from that point forward. It has to do with the subdivision. So since Northport was subdivided prior to that date, all of the platted lots, that doesn't apply. Anything brand new that needs to be subdivided in order to move forward, such as West Villages, even the larger properties like Heron Creek, Bobcat Trail, all of those have to comply with the central water and sewer requirements. But anything that was platted, individual homeowner lots, those do not apply.
What I was wondering.
May I ask a question, Mayor? As we go through this presentation, there may be some questions that will be answered during the presentation. If it would be possible, if we could just hold the questions off, this is just a request from me, and answer all the questions at the end, if that would be allowed.
I would actually suggest that for flow.
Michael, it's all yours.
Thanks, Rick. Commissioners, Mike Acosta, Utility Engineering Manager. At the January 14th meeting, on the presentation, I believe it was Commissioner Luke that asked us to take a look at wood chips. I think I said I was familiar with wood chips as it related to odor control at lift stations and stuff like that. May have built one or two of them in my career early on. And so but I wasn't familiar with it as it related to nitrogen removal. Read up a little bit and met with Steve Swa, who actually I've known for some time. I was glad it was Steve Swa and not somebody who wasn't as credentialed as Steve. That's as nice as I can put it. And Steve's a good guy. So Steve came and actually met with us, and they're doing a prototype of this project up at Lakewood Ranch. Manatee County has to use not just public access reclaimed water, but water that meets AWT standards because of the watersheds up there in their proximity to Tampa Bay. So none of the Manatee County wastewater treatment plants make AWT quality effluent. So they are polishing the effluent with these wood chips, and what that consists of is a bank of wood chips that are in the ground, five or so feet wide, 8 or so feet deep, and they run the water through it. The naturally occurring organisms, if you remember my denitrification lesson, grab the nitrate molecule, take the oxygen for respiration, and turn it into that nitrate into nitrogen gas, and obviously making it inert for everything, and clean up the water. And then they grab that water on the backside, use it for irrigation purposes. So touch base with Steve on that. Obviously, that water is pretty highly treated to begin with. In regards to, is this the magic bullet? The answer, of course, is no, it's not the magic bullet. Steve that's as widespread of a use that he's aware of. It's not long-term tested. The gas is hot, so the question always becomes, how long do the wood chips last? I don't know that we know the answer to that question yet. It's in an environment that doesn't have oxygen to it, or obviously, or else it wouldn't work. So that may last longer than in an environment that does have oxygen. So we just don't know the answer to that question. I think that Steve's approach to it as during our meeting was that this would be, the wood chips would be something that if you had a localized hotspot, quote unquote, of nitrogen pollution going into one of the canals or waterways somewhere, that you could deploy this thing and probably get some reduction in that nitrogen load going into the waterway. Is it something that you'd use on a citywide basis? Probably not. And it certainly wouldn't replace a sewer neighborhood program type system. I think I already said the trench would be 5 feet wide, 8 feet deep. You would intercept the ground, and let's assume that you would deploy that citywide. You would do this trench 5 feet wide, 8 feet deep along all the waterways to intercept the groundwater before it hit those waterways, is how you would do it. So it's a demonstrated effective solution as it relates to Lakewood Ranch and polishing of secondarily treated wastewater. If you can advance that, Jen. So the Department of Health actually has wood chips as a quote-unquote advanced treatment. And if you look at what is up on the screen, hopefully you guys see it, or in the presentation. Oh, you guys got a fancy color one. That's good. It's much easier to read. They have the wood chips down as the third layer, which is the theory here would be you've got your drain field. Your drain field takes care of the carbon side of it, of the wastewater. The yellow section would convert the ammonia in the wastewater to nitrate, and then the wood chips would take care of the nitrate to oxygen, that denitrification process. The interesting part of this one to me is that all that stuff is above the seasonal high water table. So the wood chip layer actually adds another 12 inches. So if you've seen some of the mounds that are around as far as the septic tank goes, it would actually raise it another 12 inches at a minimum. So I'm not sure how practical that is on a wide world or a large scale. The Department of Health does have that in there. They consider it advanced treatment. For that to be implemented, you guys would have to get into the septic tank business, because 99% of what the septic tanks that would potentially go in here are not in that advanced treatment mode. They're not adjacent to a waterway, those kinds of things. In a septic tank, the traditional septic tank is just the first 2 layers, and it's really designed as a public health thing. So the design is when you flush your toilet, that water doesn't stay where it when you flush it. It goes down and it does its thing. Septic tanks were never considered, you know, an environmental enhancement from a treatment standpoint. They were get rid of the stuff and so that wastewater is not in contact with human beings for obvious reasons. And I think that that's my portion of that.
So with that, next one speaker I'll bring up will be Jennifer Fairs, our utilities engineer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Ferris, Utilities Engineer. The question was posed about septic tank inspections and who does them. Charlotte County currently performs inspections. They have a county ordinance they developed for the Florida Department of Health. Under this ordinance, tanks must be pumped and inspected every 5 years. Those inspections are performed through the code enforcement portion of that county for a fee of $115. It's important to emphasize, though, with these septic tank inspections, that they're looking at the tank. They're not looking at the water quality of the drain field or water quality in the waterways. Next would be Sarasota County. Sarasota County does not currently inspect or enforce any maintenance on septic tanks. And of course, the city of Northport, we don't currently do that here. It's not to say that we couldn't, but as I said, it's important to remember that it really doesn't do much for ensuring water quality. I think that's really all I have on that.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Next, I will bring up my Assistant Utilities Director, Jennifer DeRozier.
Good morning, everyone, and I apologize for not introducing myself before. Jennifer DeRozier, Assistant Utilities Director. The question on fees and costs that we had presented back in January, just wanted a little more detail on what those costs were. So I just thought I'd go over some of those with you. The blue ones, kind of highlighted in blue, would be something that we could allow that to be paid over time, and the green ones are the ones that would have to kind of be paid up front. The plant capacity fees, as you all know, we have spent the last couple of decades investing and expanding our plants and making ourselves in a position where we would be able to serve several thousands of new connections to the systems. And the assets that we have in our system total over $185 million, and we have about, I think, over $30 million in debt. So that little $2,575 that we collect from every person on the wastewater side is to help us pay for the debt that we still have outstanding and to continue to invest in the future. And every new connection pays for their little tiny piece of that plant. To expand the water and wastewater system to areas where it currently doesn't exist does require design, permitting, construction of the new collection and distribution systems. So both an engineer and a construction company would need to be hired in order to extend that service. Now, we have not done any kind of specific analysis, but from a tabletop kind of view, we were expecting possibly the wastewater line extension fee to run about $10,000. It could be less. The city could also incentivize connection by offsetting the cost of this fee for existing homeowners, which we are going to get into in a little bit. But that again would require a specific time frame for that to occur. On-site costs as part of the construction contract, meaning that when we extend services to an area, we would also do the on-site work as well, or the construction company would do that. We could do that ourselves, but we would definitely need a time to end that for. So, you know, the construction company is not going to hang around for 3 or 4 years while people are deciding if they want to connect or not. The demo and the connection to the central wastewater are both on-site costs that would occur on the property. I'm sorry, Mike, I'm still back on the other one. There we go, thank you. And for an on-site work, they would either need to hire their own plumber, or like I said, we could maybe include it as part of the construction contract bid. That would require limited time on that. However, we do feel that that could lower the costs for homeowners because you're doing it by scale, not one little person at a time. And anytime you try to call and get a specific dollar amount for an estimate from a plumber, you get kind of wishy-washy answers. There's a lot of variables that go into one person's property compared to another. So if you could be running, 20 feet more of pipe, or, there's just a lot of differences between residences. So it's hard to get firm estimates unless you're actually, everybody wants you to give them a specific address in order to get those estimates. So it's tough. But these are kind of the averages that we were hearing. And obviously the last two items, the permitting and the lien recording fee, would need to be paid up front by the property owner. Okay, then we can go to the water side, and of course these are very similar costs as we saw on the wastewater side. The only real difference is between for the meter connection fee. We don't have a wastewater connection fee, so to say, on the meter side. This slide is showing the higher of the two fees. We currently have two fees for meter connection. You're either going to have a short or a long. We are involved, I think you all may know that we're doing a rate analysis, which is most likely going to recommend to combine those two fees and come up with one kind of middle of the road fee. So this number may change as well, but it's going to be roughly around that same price. The short is $740. The long currently is $1150. For that slide.
All right, the next one is you brought up for grant funding. We did apply for grant funding for the neighborhood expansion. Unfortunately, on May the 1st, we received notice from our lobbyist that this one was not recommended for funding. Fortunately, we met with Val, our new grants writer, last week, and we are pursuing other avenues. This department, the Department of Utilities, always strives to try to receive grant funding, and we will continue to apply for every grant out there to make this possible. So we're not going to give up on that, but unfortunately, we just found out on the 1st that we were not being accepted for funding. And the next one is on finance, and once again, Jennifer.
So our current surtax 3 funding ends in fiscal year 2024, and then the voters will vote again whether to continue to extend the surtax, and we will also have to submit, those projects for funding through some sort of citywide effort, I'm sure. This is assuming that we would allow full cost to the new construction, meaning if you have a vacant piece of property and there's nothing built there yet, that you would that the homeowner would pay for all of the costs, which is typical, you would think. But there are other ways to help kind of fund this with the existing homeowners. Surtax is currently used to extend the lines in front of the home. That's how we did the last project, and that is what we would recommend to keep doing. Per our current ordinance, the way that this works is when the homeowners pay us their monthly repayment of the loan that we've given to them, we recover a portion of that cost, and then we give that money back to surtax on an annual basis. So, which does help replenish that fund. So commission could decide to take that $7.8 million and that we currently have in this and through fiscal year 2024 and offset the entire cost, that roughly about $25,000 that you saw on those previous slides for so many homes, and that would give you enough to fund an extension for 315 homes. As you can see, that wouldn't replenish the surtax fund. It would serve the least amount of homes. It's really not addressing the septic tank issue, and it would take you the next, 5, 6 years, and you'd still only have 315 homes done. And at that rate, assuming additional funding would be continuing after fiscal year 2024, it could take the city almost 900 years to complete water and wastewater throughout the city. So that's probably not our best option. But commission could decide then to offset the cost of the line extension, which is approximately $13,500 per home. And if they did that, we could help approximately 580 homes. If commission decided to offset a flat rate, say, of $10,000 per property, we could do, help probably almost 800 homes there. If we just decided to use a flat rate of $5,000, we could help almost 1,600 homes. But even just looking at the lowest subsidy that we would, that staff would recommend anyway, it's still going to take the city almost 175 years to extend water and sewer to everyone. But there's one thing that we can tell you. It's never going to get cheaper. I say never. Probably never going to get cheaper, but it's certainly never going to get any easier, because every year you wait, more homes get septic tanks, and that impacts the problem, compounds it. So the question might be, what would the existing homeowner's responsibility be for the infrastructure if we assumed those offsets that we talked about on the last slide? So if commission chose to offset the entire cost of construction for those 315 homes, their investment would only be the $1,537, the meter connection fee and the permits. If they decided to do the line extension fee, the homeowner's investment would be $11,328. If we went with the $10,000 per home, it would be about $15,000 per homeowner. And if we went with the $5,000 per home, it would require the investment of almost $20,000 for each property owner. Staff's recommendation, after looking at this analysis, would be to go with the $10,000 surtax offset by property, requiring them to pay about $15,000, which, if you look around anywhere on that's going on right now, that's a
cheap.
Pretty decent price.
And that could be spread out over a period of time also.
Yes, and that's the next slide, I think. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background, currently we do have an extremely successful payment plan option, which does allow residents to enter into a payment plan with for the capacity fees and the line extension fees. Those are the only two things that we've really allowed thus far, but we could again go in and also include their on-site costs as well, if we're going to be including that in the bid. The charges go on the utility bill. So the customer gets one bill a month. It's very easy for them. It's very simple. They can keep track of it that way. They can prepay it with no penalties. And under this plan that we talked about on the last slide, a $15,000 payment for 20 years would cost someone about $7,250 a month. The city has also done assessment districts back in the early 2000s. We did a couple of assessment districts, but doing an assessment district would likely take more time and be more expensive than just doing it in-house the way that we do it now. Assessments are also very technical. I'm going to read a few things for you here. They require an understanding of case law, comprehensive service delivery requirements, expertise with statutory requirements, capital project timeframes, and knowledge of the ad valorem tax roll data. They require analysis to determine if the services provide a special benefit to the property and are fair and reasonably apportioned. An assessment report must also be completed, resolution of intent required, assessment resolutions, public notices, certifications to the tax collector, etc. Additionally, we are charged for our current assessment district, we're charged for someone to manage that program, and it would require us to do that for this as well. Currently, we only have, I don't know how many homes we did there, not many homes, and we pay this company, GSG, over $7,000 a year to manage that whole thing for us. So it is expensive. It does, cost a little bit more, and would not really benefit these the future residents in any way. So staff would recommend continuing with our current payment plan, but again, I think we've spoken before about this. The one thing that we would ask to be changed is we currently let them kind of, pick their date. however long they wanted. It doesn't really matter to us. They could pick it, pay it over 100 years. So we would ask perhaps that there be some kind of a stop gap in there so that, we cap it at like 20 years or so. That would be what staff would recommend. And we'll come up to some of those other recommendations at the end as well.
All right. Next to speak about our hybrid connection program will be once again Mike Acosta.
So, again, back in January, we talked a bit about how we connect these folks. There is state law on the wastewater side that once you notify people, they have 365 days to connect. The question that we had back then was, do you have to notify them? The answer to that question is yes, we have to notify them. So basically, folks would have 365 days to connect from the time that we finished the project and the project was available for service on the wastewater side. The water side is a bit different. There's no state statute, to the best of my knowledge. There is city ordinances on that front. That said, you guys, I believe, a previous commission has waived that connection requirement on the existing neighborhood program that was done on the water side. So there is some precedent on that side stuff. So this is kind of a bit updated here in regards to, since we did that, since I put this together, there's a bit more information here, so some of this may fall away. We talked about on the well, when would somebody connect if they're well? When we talked about on the well failure, that would require us to touch base with the Department of Health so that they wouldn't issue another well permit, and they would connect to the city system at that point. On the wastewater side, you can kind of cross that out. They got to connect within 365 days of us notifying them. We talked about upon the sale of the property. I think that's possible on the water side. The wastewater side, not really applicable. And then the final one is within 1 year of notification, which is the state law on the wastewater side. There is a provision to waive that on the wastewater side, but you have to get from the Department of Health a waiver to do that. We couldn't do that in and of ourselves as a city. So my guess is that given the current state of septic to sewer in the state of Florida, that is highly unlikely to be issued by the Department of Health. Because most of the state is headed the other direction. There's lots of septic to sewer programs going on in the spring systems around the state. And I think that there's a real focus out of the legislature this year from a funding perspective via DEP to do that septic to sewer stuff.
All right. Next up, I'd like to bring up Mike Vulo, the Field Operations Manager.
Hello, Mike Vulo, Field Operations Manager. Just to lead off a little bit, I won't sit really high here. What Mike was talking about, under Section 7860 of the City of Northport Administrative Code, it does state that the owner of every lot or parcel shall connect to the utility within 365 days. But it also says the city commission may, for good cause, extend the 360-day requirement for a particular lot or parcel. So that can, to me, look into the options of if it is existing or if it is a well as part of the abandonment. If a well fails, if a certain time period with the septic tank, that may be able to be looked at within that. But they will be notified within 365 days, or the connection requirements unless commission directs otherwise. Under new construction, this is under the Florida statute, chapter 381, that all residents must connect if water and sewer is available. And for residential subdivision lots, if there's a subdivision with 50 or more lots that and the sewer system is within a quarter of a mile, they must extend it and connect. So that requirement is under the Florida statute, chapter 381.
All right. Once again, I'll bring back up Jennifer to talk about expansion into our commercial areas, which is one of your 8 questions that you gave to us to come back with other information on.
So this map here shows all of the current commercial areas in the city. The dark green is where we currently have water and wastewater available to those properties. The light green shows where water is available and sewer is within that quarter mile that Mike just spoke about. It could mean that if it's light green, that a lift station is needed. The force main is right there, but a lift station is needed to serve that property. So it's essentially available, I guess, in how we would look at it. The blue shows where water is the only thing available within a quarter mile, and there is no sewer. And the pink, there's a couple pinks there. There's Warm Meadow Springs, and then Sumter and I-75. Toledo Blade and I-75 has the northern side is pink, and then what's known as, I believe, AC6 out there in the east. 6, right? Okay. Doesn't have anything that is available at all nearby. So one of the questions that I think came up was about using surtax money for expansion to the commercial areas. And the next several slides, I'm just going to give you information about that. Our city bond covenants do not allow free service or preferential rates for between the same classes of customers. Via your comprehensive plan, development is supposed to pay for development so that we don't burden the existing taxpayers for new construction. So all of the developers thus far, your Heron Creek, Bobcat Trail, all of them, West Villages, they all had to install all their infrastructure and dedicate it over to the city for absolutely free, no cost whatsoever to the existing ratepayers. Okay, Mike. This is just out of your comprehensive plan for the wastewater side, and it just I think, did we, okay. I'm sorry, for the water side then? Sorry, I had those flipped. And this basically says that the developer has to plan, design, permit, construct, and dedicate all infrastructure to the city and, go ahead, Mike, sorry, and the wastewater infrastructure in order to serve their property. Okay, thanks, Mike. So in 2007, Sarasota County Ordinance number 2007-087 was approved, placing the surtax referendum question on the ballot for us, those folks in Sarasota County who voted on that. One of the whereas clauses in there said that the public input was obtained identifying needed infrastructure projects. And the city of Northport is listed as having identified, ranked, and allocated funds to specific projects. Go ahead, Mike. So this is actually how the question appeared on the November 6th ballot, and most of you, I think, if not all, were here in 2007 when that ballot question was raised to the voters. The general description included water and water and sewer. We say wastewater now. I'm trying to be a little more friendly about that. Go ahead, Mike, sorry. But what you probably weren't aware of is, as part of the process the city undertook to develop and disseminate those numbers, those revenue numbers that were going to be coming in the future, all of the city departments got together and figured out how much money they were going to need for different projects. This was the project slide that we utilities had come up with to extend water and sewer to the neighborhoods. There is a little disclaimer on this. Initially, I know you can't read it on there, but the worksheet was submitted for requested funding of $24 million. That number was later revised down due to the economy to $17.7 million. So I just wanted to clarify that. But this slide does show our actual original worksheet that was submitted for the surtax requesting the neighborhood expansion program. The main point of this slide was basically to show that the specific description of this nearly $2 billion, what we estimated at the time to be a $2 billion issue, only recognized the platted lots and did not include any commercial properties. I kind of pulled out the description there so you could read it for yourself, but it basically talks about platted lots, has nothing to do with commercial. So that is that for the backup. This next slide shows that the city did, however, design and permit the extension of services to both of the interchanges at Sumter and Toledo Blade. The intent of doing this in advance was to save 1 to 2 years for an incoming developer. But to be consistent with all of the previously mentioned documents, bond covenants and comprehensive plan, this money would need to be reimbursed to the city in order to make things whole. Go ahead, Mike. There we go. So this is just a map of the specific areas for 75, Sumter and Toledo Blade. Sumter has basically nothing like we talked about before, but Toledo Blade, as you know, has water and wastewater on the south side. That's where our Suncoast Technical College is now. And on the eastern side of Toledo Blade, we also have a lift station right there at that cul-de-sac. The light green would require either force main extensions or some lift stations in there as well. And on the northern side, though, there is no water or sewer to that area.
And to bring up our last slide of the day, we'll have Mr. Acosta do the final wrap-up and recommendations. And then we will be glad, I'm sure there's a lot of questions, to answer any questions that you have from us.
So Commissioners, staff's recommendation would be that we move forward with the design, or the request for proposal process to get an engineer on board to design the initial phase of a neighborhood expansion process or project, that we use that the new construction would pay the full cost, whatever that number is, turns out to be. We partially offset for existing customers to the $10,000 level. On the hybrid connection, we can work on that on the water side. I don't know that we have any flexibility on the wastewater side. And then the title transfer connection, if that happens within that 365 on the wastewater side, that would be an option. Also, obviously on the water side, it would be an option all the time. May have some unintended consequences, as that would be potentially a burden, if you will, on the seller. You know, the buyer would immediately take on that, whatever that number turns into. So the first project, as we put forth back in January, would be that Madagascar area. I have since sat on a selection committee down for the city of Venice on some wastewater projects that they're doing, and the vacuum system technology has advanced significantly since the last time I heard about it, and it may be a bit cheaper and serve a much broader area with a single vacuum station. It was enlightening, let's put it that way. It continued to fund this with surtax dollars. That doesn't affect the existing ratepayers. And that those monthly monthly payments be capped at a 20-year window, and that incentive, that $10,000 incentive, be within that 365 days, because realistically, they have to connect on the wastewater side after that. Beyond that, they would be back on their own. As I said earlier, I think the legislature focused their dollars from the blue-green algae / red tide stuff on funding through the DEP, and that we're gonna, as soon as those become available, quote unquote, because I don't think the DEP has a process yet, that we would aggressively go after those to deal with some of this project. I want to refer you back to that the slide earlier on, because that unsewered parcel slide, without a neighborhood expansion process, it's the one that says unsewered parcels, 11,158 connected and 44,000. That's the future, that's the build out of Northport without a neighborhood expansion process. You have 44,000 and change septic tanks and whatever those ramifications are to the waterways. That's the build out without a neighborhood expansion, so that's why we recommend we move forward on this process. And we'll entertain whatever question you may have.
I want to wrap up with something, just a little sentence out of what I first came up with. I know this is hard, and I know now it's time for us together to do what's hard for the sake of doing what is right. This is a tough decision made by this commission, and we just look forward to doing whatever your direction is given to the utility department and to move on. So now with that, we will be ready, Mayor, with questions.
Just really quick, why are you suggesting the 10,000 surtax for property over the 5,000? What was the reason for that? Just finding the balance of
Really,
burdens?
And Jen, we kind of jointly did this stuff. She did most of it, but realistically, it's a decision for the commission.
Sure.
And the 10 grand roughly is in line with what Charlotte County is doing on their existing system. That seems to be, I think that they did 11,000 or something like that. So it's a number that's fluid, but it's totally within your capacity to make that decision. But it's really a balance in between the two, to try to do more with the project and do double the project, if you will.
The reason why I was asking was because, the one down here, what the fund line extension cost with surtax at 11,000. I mean, wasn't it, you said that's 900 years to fulfill? So I don't know what the 10,000 was. I'm assuming that's gonna be a little bit.
Jen said it was 175.
Oh, I thought that was the 5,000 was the
Is it
175.
5,000 to 175, Jen? I don't remember exactly. I can tell you that we were talking about this initially, and I may have said this to you guys before, and I was doing math in my head, and I said, that's about a 500-year project. And I said, you know what was happening 500 years ago, right? Columbus was getting here.
Well, that's what I was.
Yeah, it's the 5,000.
Is the
About
5,000 is
175 years,
Right.
so you double that.
So it's someplace in between.
Right, right, and that's why I was asking, because if the tent was, you're probably trying to find that balance between burdens.
Right.
The burden of the citizen, the burden of the city, but when I'm looking at even the 5,000, 175 years, that sounds almost insurmountable. 175 years almost as old as our country,
And that's
So-
with our current surtax funding that we currently are receiving.
That's why the
Well-
state and the federal level needs to kick in. It can't be a burden upon the taxpayer, the citizen, all the way. We need the funding from state and federal for infrastructure.
Any questions over here?
Yeah.
Commissioner, I'm gonna go to the restroom.
On the sheet that says fees and costs.
January?
No, it's on the slide. It shows on the wastewater side, demo and abandonment of the septic tank, $1,800. I'm curious, why is that not green? Isn't that the homeowner's responsibility to do as opposed to the city's responsibility?
It is the homeowner's responsibility to do it. Charlotte County, I think I said this back in January, Charlotte County took an approach to make the connection between the customer and the city system as they put it in. And that required the approval of each individual homeowner to work on their private property. And so they put it in the contractor's cost or bid item to make those connections and to abandon the septic tanks. The concept there being that you get an economy of scale by doing whatever, X number of thousands of them or some fraction of 1,000 as opposed to one. And so but that absolutely is a homeowner responsibility, the demo of the septic tank and in the connection to the city system. The city theoretically would bring it to the property line, and then the homeowner would have to connect to that system. All we're suggesting here is that we could put it together as one contract, probably get an economy of scale that would be beneficial to the homeowner as they connect. But they would not have to do that. They would have to sign an agreement to make that happen.
If I may add to that as well, the blue really just signified that the city could include that in the financing. So if they did it on their own, we would not be financing that for them. We would not be paying their plumber, and it was only if it was part of the construction contract.
That's where I was going with
Yeah.
it, because there's a lot of the things on here that is under the assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's under the assumption that the city is gonna hire a contractor, the homeowner is gonna say, yes, I want the city's contractor to do this.
Correct.
So this is based on a city-approved contractor signed off by the homeowner.
Commissioner, one of the questions that you did propose to us back in January was concerned for the existing homeowners that are already there living, to try to make it not a financial burden for them. So we researched all these different avenues to come up with different ways that it financially would not be a huge burden on the existing customers that we do have. So that's why this was incorporated in that way, shape, and form also.
Not that there's many people out there, but if they are their own plumber, they're plumber by trade, they could do this work themselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly.
So if they're licensed through the state, they could do this themselves?
Except for the backflow, I believe the backflow is a special certification, you would need that, you know. I don't think the connection needs to be, but the inspection, right?
Inspection.
So the inspection part of the backflow would need to be in. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions while we're on these fees pages? Since the mayor stepped out. Okay.
Those pages, no, there's a lot of other.
Yeah, I have a lot of other too, so go ahead, we'll probably just take turns.
It sounds like we really looked at Charlotte County, because they have a program similar to theirs. So they offer $11,000 at the time of hookup.
My recollection off the top of my head, so don't quote me on this one, is that their commission offset the construction cost, whatever that number was, by about that amount. So I think that their connection, by the time they had all the numbers, was something like 22,000. And where I'm getting this information is I was at a presentation 2 or 3 months ago that they did at a professional association, and that's where this is coming from, so it's coming from my memory. So that's why I said don't quote me on the numbers, but it's $22,000 was the connection fee, if you will, by the time you put in all the construction and their capacity fees and all those other things. And they roughly offset it by about $10,000 or $11,000. In other words, kind of almost split it in half, so that the burden was equally shared, quote unquote. And I don't know the source of their funding for that $11,000. Just as a side note, we had met with their assistant county administrator, and they had some shovel-ready projects, i.e. they were already designed and ready to go. And they got some DEP funding for that, so that may have been what those offsets were and didn't come out of the existing ratepayers.
It'd be interesting to find that, so that we're not making a decision to eat up our surtax.
Right.
And they might be having funding coming from somewhere else, because we're blindly looking at what they're doing without knowing the detail.
No, I think
So I
that
think that'd be
they told us
important.
that, they told us that they had that funding from the DEP, because they had DEP was looking for a project to go do. And they had the money sitting, they had the design sitting there, all they had to do was bid it.
So they weren't eating up their surtax.
Well, I don't know how they funded that design, but that's obviously this much of the project, not the big chunk.
Basically, the 10,000, you're giving the water free. I mean, you're hooking, the water is a little over between $8,000 and $9,000. So pretty much you're hooking into sewer and getting the water is kind of a way that you could look at it too. You mentioned about heading into Venice and learning a little bit more about the vacuum. What's the cost compared to what we're looking at?
Well, we in January, we proposed we showed you 2 options, gravity sewer and vacuum. The vacuum system was still cheaper, the preferred method over gravity at that point. the technology has advanced. What I learned in Venice during those presentations that were done by the consulting engineers is that the reach of these individual vacuum stations that are not cheap, but neither is a lift station, that the reach of those has broadened significantly. I mean, they said up to 2 miles. I conservatively say 1.5 miles. So if you plot down a station in here, my brain is drawing a 1.5 mile radius around that, so a 3 mile circle that would potentially all go into that one station. So if you plop those 3 mile diameter circles, you know, randomly in the city, that is not as much as what we were envisioning originally from a cost standpoint. The problem is on this first phase, you got to build a vacuum station, period. Now, we would strategically locate that vacuum station so that the next phases would really just be piping coming into that vacuum station and would dramatically decrease the cost on that second phase potentially. The other thing on the vacuum stations, I'm sure you're familiar with Sarasota and all the affectionately known as candy canes in everybody's front yards up there, and you see them in Englewood as well. Those candy canes are no longer candy canes, and they're not in everybody's front yard. They're basically another utility box at a right-of-way line that 3 or 4 houses can connect into. So some of the ugliness of putting those in people's front yards has gone away. Saw a lot of that. There's a lot of work going on in Port St. Lucie that a local firm is doing here, Giffords and Webster there in Englewood. They've kind of carved out this niche on doing septic to sewer or just converting old systems. The project in Venice has a sewer system, but it's in the backyards, it's old, and who knows who owns it. City of Venice is maintaining it, yes.
We're looking at vacuum for our project.
In all likelihood. I mean, that'll be something that in this first phase of the project with a design firm that we would evaluate all the options available and get a life cycle cost of all those items. But everything that I have seen says vacuum is less expensive both initially and long term.
Just for my clarification, lift station, vacuum station, are they the same thing or is it a different?
Sort of, kind of. So a lift station, traditionally gravity flows, all the water goes there, all the wastewater goes there via gravity, and then it just pumps it to the next place, hopefully all the way to the wastewater treatment plant, but in some cases to the next lift station where it pumps it again and again.
Just raises it up so you have more gravity.
Exactly.
So a gravity station is for a gravity system,
Right.
a
So-
lift station is for a gravity system, and a vacuum station is for a vacuum system.
And a vacuum station has a lift station component, quote unquote. So the vacuum station quite literally sucks the wastewater to itself. You know, and the pipes are much smaller, they don't have to be at a grade, so that you can go shallower. That's what reduces the cost of construction. And then it collects it all there, and from there it pumps it to the wastewater treatment plant or wherever the next step is in there. That part of it is similar, that last part, very similar to a lift station.
So if you have a vacuum station with a 1.5 mile radius, then you have to build a lift station outside of it to connect all these vacuum stations?
Nope. The vacuum station itself collects the wastewater all into that one spot, into that wet well, and from there it pumps it, and it becomes, in essence, at that point, a lift station. It's all in one.
Gotcha.
And they're all, you're familiar with what a lift station looks like, I'm sure you see them all over town. We have 110 of them, or so. They grow every couple of weeks, it seems like. So those vacuum stations, I have yet to see one that doesn't look like a house. They're completely enclosed. There's, you know, since it's a closed system, there's no odor. There's a significant amount of advantages from an operation standpoint. The disadvantage is that we don't have any, so our guys aren't familiar with them. But they can learn.
But the vacuum system, the vacuum station would look similar and no smell and have similar features as a lift station?
It would be enclosed, because all that pumping equipment is actually enclosed in a building. and you can make the building look however you want. You can
But
blend it right into.
There's no smell, there's no sound,
That's
there's.
correct. There's much less smell and sound than a lift station has a potential for, yes.
Thank you for letting me get that.
Yeah, this is a topic that, I'm not a pro at. So the presentation, there was many wheels turning, trying to grasp and envision what you're talking about. Why are we focusing so much upon hooking up the current customer, especially when we have such new construction? Why aren't we focusing on getting our lines laid so that as the new construction comes in, they have to hook up?
Two things. One like West Village's new construction, they're laying the lines, and everybody's connected. Okay.
1972 things, so they have to. I'm just talking about those plotted lots.
And if you look at where Jen, if you go to the one where it has the existing septic tanks, the one with the yellow on it.
You're about a third populated.
Correct. So you pick a spot, kind of anywhere you go, and you're gonna wind up with existing customers with the exception of that one little section, straight up, it looks like, whatever that road is, the west of Sumter. That area right there is kind of the only place that you're not gonna impact existing, and I don't know what those growth rates are there, if that's where it would be. The concept, Commissioner Luke, would be to just start wherever we would wanna start. I mean, we had proposed Madagascar based on the information from.
Right here. Right here.
Rick?
Right there, right, if you look,
On this map.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, right up here.
right there where the arrow's
This is
pointing.
the school, so.
And that was chosen because there's a lift station in proximity there.
And there's existing water lines there.
Right.
And a force main, so that was oversized by the city when Lamarck Elementary built.
So that's why that was selected and proposed. But it could kind of be anywhere. It depends on what we would want to do collectively as a city, decide to do that with that. We could start anywhere you'd like.
And if I was listening correctly, we have laws that tell these people that they have to hook up if it's available. There was one, I believe you were talking, a law that does have some added wording. I wasn't able to capture section 78-60. We talked about there might have been some type of loophole. It's what I was gathering from what you said.
365 connection? On the wastewater side.
Section 7860, I believe that was Florida statute.
No, that's our code.
It's our code, okay.
The city commission may, for good cause, extend 365 requirement for a particular law.
Slide number 15.
Yeah. There's actually the city code. It appeared, so I'll read to you. The owner may, the city commission may, for good cause, extend the 365 requirement for a particular lot or parcel. That's kind of what it says. I don't know, based on what the city attorney said to us, that you have that option on the state statute, on the wastewater side. Does not appear to me. I don't know that you can go looser than the wastewater side, on the wastewater side, absent the DOH concurring with that.
Yeah, because this still isn't clear to me. I mean, it's forcing something
If the
that
sewer is
bothers me.
required by the state to be 365.
Is it, first of
Yes.
all?
Yes.
So the state is mandating that within 1 year of available sewer, they have to hook up.
Yes.
How do you measure that if you are not requiring to mandate through the city's ordinance to hook up to the city's water? So let's say if the commission says, okay, we're going to, instead of requiring city water hookup for 2 years, but the state is mandating sewer hookup for within 1 year, how are you going to monitor, how are you going to grasp how much sewer is going through the line if there's no water? You can't.
Yeah, well, right, because we don't measure sewage, but I've done that before. And what you do is establish a flat rate for sewer service. So, what's the flat rate look like? Therein lies the art of rate making. But the simple thing is you add the base facility charge to the average consumption for the city, and that's your flat rate for sewer.
How do you, I mean, how do you eventually end up measuring the sewer? Because there's people like me that I water everything and it doesn't even go through the sewer lines, but because you're measuring my water, I end up paying for sewer that I didn't use. So where do you end up in the future where that can be measured?
That's measured at the treatment plant where it comes into the plant, comes in and it's measured, and then as it goes out the door, it's measured again.
But not for my house.
Nope.
I
I don't know of anybody that measures wastewater from a house.
You can't put a meter on,
But in the rate making, what Mike was just talking about, that rate making, process that occurs, the city of Northport, their level of service for water is not the same as wastewater. So that assumption that all of your water does not go down the drain is already included in the rates that we develop through our rate analysis.
Now, you may be exceptional, but because you use more of that. But the
Based on average.
old school average was 90 or 80% of the water that you consume through the meter, it comes back to us as wastewater or come back to any utility. The new school stuff is about 90% because of the focus on conservation. So that's built in kind of sort of.
Because I thought it was 100, 100, so thank you for doing that. So we're at this point where by the state, we have to, if we put those lines down, they have to hook up.
City sewer on the sewer.
On the sewer side.
Is that correct? We're forced to do so. Even if that person just built that house last year and have a brand new septic and well.
that's
Well,
correct.
the
We're
septic
forced
side.
to notify. That's where our requirement comes in.
And they're forced to hook up within 365. Right.
That is so unfair. In my book, that is so unfair to somebody. It's illogical too, because these septic tanks, especially the modern ones, are extremely good in function. I wish we could run our lines and then just have them hook up, as this hybrid was talking about, when the well fails, when the septic fails, and exchanging of the title on the property or something like that. That, to me, is a good compromise. But forcing people when they have just built their house in the last even 5 years, that's hard to swallow.
If I'm from a legal standpoint, just to reaffirm what the utilities department has said, that is right. The state statute does have these requirements for the city to notify and for the property owner to connect. And correct me if I'm wrong, utilities experts, but it sounds to me like part of the issue when you say like this doesn't make sense and the policy behind it is, remember that we are a unique community because we are pre-platted. On the development side, platting doesn't usually occur until you're ready to develop. So in a typical community, you have this big piece of land that's owned maybe by a family or a ranch or whatever, and you only start to break it up and subdivide it when you're ready to develop. And as you subdivide, then you come and you plat it. So, you know, I think maybe some of the illogical effects here because we're a unique community in that.
Because we were illogical starting.
Exactly. But with that being said, is there some way to find that loophole or circumvent because we are unique? We special.
Unfortunately, the state legislature has not provided for that.
They didn't provide for
It's
special
very,
folks like us.
the statute is very straightforward.
Commissioner, on your question on being not fair for a recently built house, I believe there is something, Jennifer, maybe help me out here. I believe there's something we already got established out there within so many years, it's some type of a break or something.
Right, so on the water side, when we did the pilot study before, we actually implemented right into our ordinance that we would give, if anyone could show us proof that they just built a well within the last 5 years, a discount on that as well. So financially, it wouldn't burden them as much. I know there's other burdens that you're talking about.
Mhm.
But there's, right, so it's a graduated credit that we kind of give them, based on the years of service that their well has been in place for. And we could implement some language like that into the new, this was just for the well side, but we could, implement that type of a thing for the sewer
Septic
side as
too.
well. Just to help them out financially. I know there's other considerations that they're.
Is there a way to make that, take that same philosophy of how many years you've been there and put it to how much they're given to compensate?
We can write this incentive program any way you want. We can make it, we can go through 100 different machinations of what this needs to look like. We can put more funding on, you can really do whatever you want with that. I mean, these are just some suggestions that we came up with. But whatever the commission decides, we are willing and able to develop a program that will hopefully address those concerns for you. If you give us direction, we are more than happy to take that.
I understand your quote, and I would love for you to send that to me.
Yes.
But I see a need in the neighborhoods, but a community benefit, citywide, to hook up to War Mineral Springs, because it's my understanding that funding is not available. Not down into the county, the unincorporated part of it, to War Mineral Springs, and then out to the interstate interchanges. To me, that serves a much larger public purpose. We will eventually get that money back, correct? Once they develop. Then we can start focusing on the neighborhoods, because Madagascar, while I understand the reasoning why Madagascar was chosen, along the Myakkahatchee Creek, those parcels, if there are any, I'd have to double check my map, would seem like the next logical spot, or along the canals for the city water, city sewer, because then the sewer, the nitrogen isn't leaching into the canals. Madagascar doesn't have that much waterway out in that area. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Well, and one thing about that Madagascar area, and there are other areas, is that the main infrastructure is already there. And that just makes it so much cheaper, because the city, when the mark was built, paid to oversize the water, the sewer, force main, and the lift station, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars that the city invested to accommodate that area, because that's already there. Some of these other areas along the along the Cocoa Plum and those canals, the main infrastructure is not there. So that would have to be put into place.
If I may add to that as well, along the Myakkahatchee Creek, where you did see, there's quite a bit of red, that there's not really a whole lot of yellow along that area. The city has been in a program to purchase
The ones
Tier
along the
one,
creek,
Tier
we've been
two.
buying those lots. They'll never be developed.
Right, they'll never be developed. So we
Okay.
wouldn't be serving them with water or sewer anyway.
So right, because this map is
It looks,
partial,
right.
it's only the tier 1, tier 2 lots that we're already purchasing. It's not outside of that area.
That's the current plan, yes, unless something changes, but
All right.
correct. And those lots were
So
done with
I-
DEP funds.
I go back to the priority being War Mineral Springs for putting in the city water and sewer, and then going out to the interchanges. Because of the large public purpose, War Mineral Springs makes the most sense first, because that's the springs, and more susceptible to the runoff of the bad stuff. I don't know what else to call it. Getting into that waterway and into the springs itself, as opposed to being in the neighborhoods.
On the Warm Mineral Springs thing, how I feel about that, For the utility to pay, to run it to just the Springs area itself, to pick up one customer is really, I don't see that as a benefit to our existing ratepayers. For them, and now if some other fund or department wanted to pay for it, I'd be glad to see that happen.
Can I also,
Yes.
one more thing? Utilities does not pay to run utilities anywhere. Okay, all right, I just wanna make sure. Right, like it's, Warren Middle Springs is a park, it's a city park. City parks would be the entity that would pay for extension to the park. They paid for, that's how, it has typically been done in the city in the past.
So why would, it was my understanding though, that the utilities was going to run the lines from Triunfo to Warren Middle Springs, then down Ortiz. There's no ratepayers down Ortiz. We can't make those folks hook up. So why would utilities be paying?
We wouldn't.
No.
We wouldn't be paid.
It was my understanding that it was a utilities project.
It would be a project managed by utilities, but they wouldn't pay for it because they, like Jennifer just stated, it would be part of the project costs, not funded from utilities.
So it's part of the Warren Middle Springs project that utilities, okay, now I understand the distinction. Okay. But if you're not running it down Ortiz, that cost is like cut in half, I would think.
Well, if you're talking the water line,
Then you have the looping issue, you still have the
There's
looping
looping
issue.
issues all over the city.
We don't want to really create any more.
But I don't have to pay for something that nobody in the city is getting a benefit from to go down Ortiz. That doesn't make the logical sense.
well, there are those,
Do the loop, so
I
for the
understand looping,
benefit of
but
it.
not down Ortiz.
there are those commercial properties as well that are along Ortiz in the county, in the city, I'm sorry, that would also eventually connect as well. So they would, if we could oversize that line, what they would do is the engineers would look at what Warren Middle Springs needs for the size of their pipes. Utilities would say, yeah, but we have to serve these other commercial properties down here, so we will upsize that line, from an 8 to a 10 or whatever, and then we would fund that piece through our capacity fee funds, and then when those commercial properties developed, we would say, okay, now you need to pay us back for the contribution in the construction that we invested in the beginning. And that's how that works.
Sewer lines and water lines down 41 anyways to serve those.
It doesn't go down Ortiz.
I'm not talking about Ortiz. I'm talking about commercial property on 41. There's no commercial property on Ortiz. There's the
Yes.
two little ones right around.
They're not so little, they're fairly large. I don't know.
What was the one that
Plan in here, but-
doctor owned?
Yeah, the
Dr. P.
properties.
Yeah, there's several properties, there's, I think, I don't know, 4.
No, that's on
Oh, no,
41.
I'm talking further down by Warren Middle Springs, there's,
So why can't you loop it just around within the city limits of the city of Northport and then?
Because that's really not a loop. Because the water is coming down from a pressure standpoint, comes down the pipe. And so if you have a loop onto itself down here, if that water doesn't get used up here, this water's not coming this direction. It's not gonna force its way back out unless there's a really low pressure situation out here, which is obviously what we try to avoid. When you loop it all the way around, that water can go multiple different ways. And that's why you don't have those dead water issues and we're not flushing and all those kinds of things.
I understand about the Warren Middle Springs thing. If I was queen for the day, I would be focusing on the commercial properties at interchanges because that serves a much greater public purpose, quicker, easier, and it's more beneficial all the way around. And we get the money back when those properties develop, and it makes it quicker for them to get developed.
Okay, the same as the residential, I needed some help understanding where we're at legally and everything. I need some help with this commercial aspect too. So there were things discussed about this quarter mile. And if you're within a quarter mile, you have to do this. If, you pass it, you don't. So Sumter and 75 doesn't look like there's water and sewer for over a quarter of a mile. So let's say one of your commercial developers decides he wants to develop out there on that corridor of 75. He has to go 2 miles, 3 miles, or whatever, and run that himself, even though you have residential in between.
We would pay to oversize.
It's not on, we don't have anything on Sumter, so, and we don't have residences connected that are on Sumter. I mean, we could eventually, right.
That's what I'm getting at. But you have tons of them on each side of Sumter that are residential, they're on sewer, or excuse me, septic and well currently, but you're gonna make them pay all the way out there, and then you can pay to oversize and then hook everybody up on the outsides. So how is it fair that a commercial has to pay from where your infrastructure left off, when you're gonna be able to connect to residential in between point A and point B?
That's why we would oversize the line so that we could accommodate for that, for those eventual connections as well. We did the same thing with West Villages. West Villages built and designed, constructed, and dedicated all that infrastructure from Ortiz all the way north up to West Villages in order to start their construction, to start their development.
This is law we're talking about. The state statute states that commercial has to do this themselves, even though there is benefit of the residents in between. Is that a correct statement?
The state statute that I researched refers to the property owner. It does not distinguish between residential or commercial.
And it's pretty, and I'm not sure that the wastewater actually would be available for those folks on Sumter,
Yeah,
under that scenario, because that would be a force main, and you can't gravities, their system, they would have to build a little lift station in order to get into that system, which we would not suggest that we do. We don't wanna get into the tiny lift station business, nor do the homeowners wanna be in the tiny lift station business.
So we've got properties within our city that we will never service. So this 16,000, how many of them we will never hook into?
No, that's not what we're suggesting. Most of those obviously are in residential areas, and as we run the water and the wastewater along those streets to their neighbor that's not connect, that's an empty lot today, when they build, they would connect to it, and those folks that are on there today would connect within 365 on the wastewater side. So no, the intent would be that those 16,000 roughly, in the due course of the projects, however long those take, would be connected to the system.
But you just stated that the residential areas off of Sumter, pretty much we're not gonna touch.
They would be
because they
served from a
require.
different direction. They would be served from, we're not gonna build a system where only one lot can be served from each side of that. So my guess would be, without looking at everything, you build a system on the east or west side of Sumter to serve those neighborhoods, and that they potentially could go into that force main that would be built along Sumter Boulevard, or they could go a different direction. It just, without laying the system out, we don't know the answer to that question. But individual people will definitely not connect to that force main on Sumter that would go out to serve commercial properties.
Oh, I see what you're talking about, individual people.
As one of Mike's favorite things that he usually said, and I'm surprised he did not say this, and Vice Mayor, I think you're very familiar with this. All those individual homes, think of those as individual straws going into that cup. That we could not happen. You can't have hundreds of individual straws going into that system. We would take an area, as Mike was discussing before, with the vacuum, with that radius of 2.5 miles, and then hook up all of those homes into there to one central system and have one straw going into the main instead of hundreds of straws.
Looking at this map, I see that the Lamarck Elementary has the green, so that means they have city water, city sewer, correct? So if you were to run along I-75 instead of coming up Sumter, it looks like it's much, much closer to go from Lamarck Elementary over to Sumter interchange. Is that something that would be feasible to do? And then my next question is, why is it not north of the interstate? Why is that not red? Why is that white?
So you're looking at,
It's hard to see this.
yeah, I don't know which, are you is it this map you've got up? Okay.
I think, Jen, if you go to your map, your other map,
You
it's
see where
clearer.
the green square is?
Yep.
And then you just go straight westward
Yeah, along the canal you're
along
talking?
the canal there?
Yeah,
Instead of going straight up in Sumter?
yeah, this is a 12-inch on
Mhm.
Sumter there. You know, I don't know.
If you go to slide 17, it may be a bit clearer, I think. I'm not 100% sure of that. Because if you look on 17 where see where, Commissioner, if you see where it ends there on 17, it's probably, my guess is that eventually there would be a loop there that would connect those two. But if you, where Sumter is currently,
This is Sumter.
So using the map on 17, there's city water and city sewer at Lamarck.
Right.
Okay. So if you were to go straight west to the Sumter interchange,
Mhm.
where you have the 4 quadrants, one is labeled 1 and one is labeled 2. I'm not sure what that means. But could you run city water and city sewer out to that interchange?
Probably.
Using the Lamarck,
you have to do the hydraulics on, the hydraulic model on that. I'm not familiar enough with that, the
That's
model
75.
to know where that, how Lamarck is fed and where from.
Well, we've,
From Price.
and I don't know, but I'm gonna just throw this out there. We did pay to have that engineered and designed. Several years ago, we paid to have that done. And we can find that, very good question, Vice Mayor, and we can find that out, why our engineer of record went that other route, because I believe Lamarck was already in place at that time, so there, I don't know, but there's probably some reason why they did it that way. I don't know, but I will find it. That's a very good question.
Well, it's interesting because it sits out there with nothing around it.
So then I go
So
back to my
how-
question about looping. If looping is so important, where is this looping to? Because it looks like it's an island all on its own.
This is just the commercial areas, so the water customers, you don't see the residential water customers along the way.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of customers that we have along there, and it branches out along.
And Lamarck, the water line for Lamarck is looped back into, is it Salford?
No, I think it's
Cranberry?
Mhm.
It goes underneath the creek.
Yeah.
So that's looped from both sides, the water main. The sewer lines are, is not the issue with the looping, that's water.
Yeah, we don't want loops doing that.
Is it possible for you to get us some information from Lamarck to the Sumter interchange to check the feasibility? I mean, if it's already been through the design, where did it start to be able to have it designed and stuff? That's.
Yeah. Right now, it's permitted from, like, City Hall, from this area, north on Sumter. But the thing that catches, I mean, probably could have been the main reason why they wouldn't have looked that way is that's I-75. So you're talking state right away. I don't know that we have any ability to, I don't know.
We'd have to look into it. That was my first thought too, is in order to get it from where Lamarck is to that interchange, we may not have the right of way to put the pipes in. I don't know what's right off the top of my head if we have that. We have it along Sumter.
And I understand that there's residential lots between Lamarck and going westward along I-75. There's residential lots. But part of our connectivity study was to see about a frontage road there. And can you use the right of way in front of those residential lots? Because the city owns the right of way.
There should be at least 20 foot,
And then
wouldn't
you've
there
got your
be, of
20-foot
easement?
easement in the back.
Yeah.
So why can't you use that?
I think one major issue would be for that Madagascar area, for that lift station that was oversized in that area, by adding the capacity from that interstate, from that Sumter project, adding that capacity to that lift station would take the capacity away from that surrounding neighborhood. So something else would have to be built in order to accommodate that entire area in there, because now you would be using that capacity that was designed for that lift station for that particular neighborhood. So, I mean, there's.
Well, I don't know that I would ever recommend that we would put the wastewater from those areas directly into that
Into that.
Lamarck lift station, you know,
You're
for
talking
obvious
commercial
reasons.
areas?
Yes,
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, I don't think.
No,
that-
I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
not obvious.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Understand.
I don't know exactly how that developed.
Please explain for those that don't understand.
But
I'm all on
Well,
board here.
Well, I would think that the flows are likely to be too high, but I don't know, maybe
Okay,
that's.
so basically what I'm hearing is you guys need to do a little bit more
Yeah.
research
Oh.
for going from Lamarck to the interchange at Sumter.
Yeah, is that's,
That'll be
those stations probably was not sized for that kind of commercial development, was just my guess on that.
What do we have coming down Sumter to City Hall that
Yeah.
could handle it?
I
That's
don't know that there's anything coming down Sumter to City Hall, so that's why those that's why, right. Exactly, that's why those design,
Right here at City Hall.
that flow is designed hydraulically to come down, Sumter. That's what the pipelines are designed for.
Was your design and permitting from Sumter to, up Sumter to the commercial properties to City Hall, that line?
Yes.
Was it for wastewater and city water, or was?
Yes.
Okay. So that's already been designed and permitted. What would be the cost to run the lines? And since there's no residential on Sumter that would be required to hook into it, and I've heard you guys say that the neighborhoods off of Sumter would have to have their own little lift stations or vacuum stations themselves, what would it cost to run the wastewater, the city water, city sewer lines up to those properties?
The ones back in those neighborhoods?
No?
No,
Up
to
to
the-
the commercial properties.
Just wanna make sure we.
Yeah.
We got the engineering, the
Yeah, I don't
probable
think we have an
cause,
updated, that's what I was asking.
And if so, that was,
2012.
yeah, that was 6 years ago.
But we can look at it, we can
Yeah, we
bring
can get that
back.
info.
That would have to be paid back, because they have to pay that back, correct, according to law?
Tell me to find
And
out.
from memory, I'm gonna say it was about $150,000
Yeah.
for both of those.
So the design,
For both,
Toledo Blade and Sumter.
so that's combined for both? Okay.
I believe.
because I don't know, Mayor, if we need a consensus or not, I would be interested in getting the costs of construction from City Hall north to the 4 quadrants, city water, city sewer. And another one would be from Lamarck westward to those 4 quadrants at Sumter. That's what I would like to see, those numbers and that information, because I don't know where the rest of the board is. I'm more inclined to focus on the commercial properties first, and then see about the neighborhood properties.
I'm inclined to go with staff's recommendation only because this isn't my wheelhouse. However, I see absolutely no problem in, because you guys said you can find those costs and all that. I have no
Oh, yeah.
problem looking at that because that might change. That might change things once we look at it.
And
There will be hopefully a presentation coming forward where a developer is looking at Sumter and that corridor out there. So it's not as though we're discussing something that's pie in the sky, but we probably will be seeing a presentation come forward. So trying to prepare for that, I think, is wise.
So I'm a yes on that consensus. Commissioner Luke?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitch?
Yes.
You have a unanimous consensus.
And that's gonna include the Lamarck to.
Yes, ma'am, going up Sumter and then from Lamarck over.
But I think we need the balance, just like commercial has to balance residential. I think we need the balance in this, and we don't put one over another. I think we have to view both of them. So I think we need to look at what you brought forward here and figure out how we're going to tackle septic to sewer.
Can I move over to the Toledo Blade area? Because I have a huge question on that area. So if you look at the interchange at Toledo Blade, and Toledo Blade and 75, the southeast quadrant has these numbers 32 in it, and it's a light green. That is a huge parcel that at some point would probably get redeveloped into homes or commercial properties or something like that, get replatted.
Those are all commercial. They're already currently designated as commercial, some kind of commercial development.
Got it in that area too.
So there's, remind me what the light green is on that?
Water's available and sewer is within a quarter mile, or they need a lift station.
Okay.
So we're looking at the people who are wanting to develop that commercial, them having to pay for it to be hooked
Yeah,
up
they would
because
have to
it's,
pay because it's
under
within that
that.
quarter
Yeah.
mile. There's nothing to be really run out there because.
Well, I mean, it was already run. Benderson ran all of the infrastructure out there already.
Okay.
No, the city didn't do any of that, just like AC5. That was all run by the developer.
Who put in for the college?
The college put in for the college. They built all their infrastructure.
So the college has the infrastructure at the northwest quadrant, and it's kind of funky shaped. Is that the out parcels, or is this an old section? Because, oh, that's.
Are you talking?
Sorry,
Oh.
sorry. I answered my own question.
Okay.
What would the cost be? That's on the other side of 75.
Yes, on the other side
Sorry.
of 75, yes.
So what would the costs be to run from what is existing right under 75 to the other side? Is that something you guys could look at too?
We may have gotten, that's the same question on the engineer's opinion of probable cost. We can look that up and send that off to you as well, if we have it. If we don't have it, we can.
There isn't there?
The cost that we would be able to give you would not have any on-site costs at all. Our costs would be only to get the cost to the line to be in front of the property. What they have to do on their
property.
On-site?
Yeah, you're just running it to, along the streetway, and then they
Right.
have to connect.
Well, again,
I see.
it's not we, because normally we wouldn't, utilities, we didn't run anything for AC5, we didn't run anything for any of Benderson properties, Cocoa Plum, none of that was put in by utilities. That's not what we do.
Yes, yeah, I guess.
Uh,
So then why don't
When I'm looking at it, and it's within that quarter mile, that makes sense to me. Yeah, do it. But when they're having to run for miles, that bothers me. You know, that they're forced to do it, that part bothers me, but I understand it's the law.
The developers know this too, if they want to develop, and
I know.
that explains why a lot of our interchanges aren't getting developed, it's cost prohibitive. You know, Mayor, does everybody want to get the idea of what it would cost to run the lines to the north?
Yeah, I think you said you had that, you just gotta
We
get
may
it
have,
together.
yeah, we're gonna look back when we get
So
that.
you'll do
And
that?
yes,
Mhm.
yes, sir. Mhm.
That's okay, so.
And are they cost estimates from when the designer did the permitting, so they're already old? You would have to find out to upgrade it to the current costs. I mean, I don't want old information, I want current information.
We can figure that out.
From '07, we probably need to multiply by like 10.
I think it's 2012, I think, Mike, somewhere in that.
Well, I think that
Which
we'll
still
get a
needs
fresh
grading.
one. To go underneath the interstate is gonna cost $200 a foot or so.
Why can't you just go?
That'd be even more expensive.
What if you just
Shot it across.
Get a clear tunnel.
time you're driving?
Suicide.
And roll the windows
What
up.
happens
Roll the
when
windows up.
Sewer's shooting back.
Yeah.
We can get those costs.
You know, wastewater cannon.
So are we done with the commercial aspect? So we can go back to residential.
There was one question I believe you asked in the beginning that we didn't get to, just in this discussion here. You asked about the gray on top of 75, or not on this map, but the white on top of 75. And so the city's comprehensive plan, everything, even from the 90s, always anticipated that we would always serve the whole city with water and sewer, with the exclusion of Northport Estates, which is to the north of 75, and Lake Geraldine. Those were never anticipated to ever connect to water and sewer because their properties, as Mike will tell you, are large enough to have a well and septic tank on them. So,
Thank you for that,
yes.
I appreciate that.
Yes, I just didn't want to leave
I
that
did ask that
unanswered.
question,
Yes.
and
I'd forgotten that.
thank you.
Commissioner Lip?
I think if we're done with the commercial, we need to go back and start pounding out what we want to do with these residential.
Pound it out.
I like, I don't know, just something about, especially if they're already existing, you have to provide. And the mayor questioned about the 10,000, and it makes it so much more relevant than the 5,000, because I was thinking, well, 5,000, you can get more of them and this type of stuff. But when you talk about taking what somebody just built or what's been existing and there's been no issue with it, and forcing them to do something, yeah, that 10,000 doesn't sound like very much. And I like the thought of them getting water by hooking into the sewer, because it's covering that cost of that. But I would like to see, like a prorated amount, depending upon how long they've been there.
That sound, is it all right to
And I
grab?
would like more information on what you guys have in place now for the water. I didn't know you guys had it,
Proration?
proration or anything like that for water. I would like to see what that looked like, and also what would be suggested for sewer.
I can tell you, no one to date has asked for that or taken advantage of that. However, because we did it with the pilot project, which was not, according to the way we worded it, not mandatory. So if we go with sewer and it is mandatory, we have to connect, and you offer incentive programs for them to connect within so much time, I think you'll see a lot more people take advantage of that.
Can we go back, because you had that pilot program.
Yes.
Were there existing homes at that point?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
They were forced then within 3
No, it was water only, so it fell under our city ordinance, and commission at the time allowed us to not send the notification requiring connection.
Okay, tell me why it's so important to do both at the same time, instead of just running water everywhere.
Well, my personal
I can give you
My
mine
personal
too.
professional opinion is that it's really nitrogen at the end of the day. And the blue-green algae, and how much can the soil absorb in this area before you return all the canals into that lovely lime green color during certain parts of the year. That's really where I think it's gonna head. And if you have a density of 45,000 septic tanks
I
within.
think we got a slide coming
Within
on
that
the
corporate,
blue-green algae.
oh, I didn't want to use this because I think it's presumptuous. So that's really, I think that the wastewater for me is more important from an environmental standpoint.
Can't really
The
see it
water
too good.
is a drinking water.
And I agree, but cost-wise, I have far more people writing me and telling me, when are we gonna get water? I would hook up to water. They don't talk about sewer, but they talk about, I want water.
I think that my personal experience over my career with septic tanks, twofold. One, if it flushes and it goes away, everybody's happy. They're not concerned or aware necessarily of what the environmental consequences of that flush are. As long as it doesn't plug up, and I mean, I've gotten lots of calls over my career where it's not flushing. Or they take a shower and there's 4 inches of water sitting there because their septic tank is clogged up or whatever the case may be. But nobody's really monitoring the water quality coming out of septic tanks. That's just not what we do. We monitor that the water goes down and disappears. Out of sight, out of mind, good on that. And then that and that's the focus of the health department is exactly that. So, even the inspection programs, they're inspecting, an inspection of a septic tank involves 2 things. How the lids, because the gases that come off of that wastewater generally eat away concrete, and over time, people fall in when they walk over their lawn because that concrete is so eaten away that it fails, and people, most of the time it's a kid, unfortunately, winds up in the septic tank. And there's been some really bad outcomes on that. So that's primary number 1 on a septic tank inspection. Then number 2 is they'll walk the drain field. And what does that do? If you're walking the drain field and it's squishy, that's a bad thing because the water's coming up, not down, and not going down. And that's kind of the extent of it. We're not out there, those places that have septic tank inspections, they're not doing water quality in the intervening waterways, or there may not be waterways or in the groundwater. So that's why my focus is on the water side. I completely concur. For a different reason. Most people are concerned with the water quality because it's horrible in this general area. It's just bad geology underneath the ground, and that's the way it is. My bigger concern is a health concern on the water quality side, and that's that you have a septic tank in the front yard and your well in the backyard. And so they're doing, perhaps in some cases, my favorite term, direct potable reuse. Their wastewater is becoming their drinking water.
Or the neighbors.
Or even worse if it's your neighbor's wastewater becoming your drinking water, because you don't have those bugs. You have your own bugs and you're good. Your own bugs aren't generally gonna hurt you because you already have them. So if you ask me my choice, I would do wastewater because my heart winds up in the environment at the end of the day on that side of it. But I think that a dual approach from a cost and construction standpoint, doing it simultaneously is way more efficient and way more cost effective.
That's what I wanted to hear. Environmentally, we all have a heart toward that, but I didn't know if there was that great of a value cost-wise, running them at the same time.
Well, I think, you'd have you'd have to be mobilizing to the same site twice ultimately over whatever time period. And, I think that my worldview of this is that at some point, there's that tipping point, and we don't know what that number is. We just don't. And if somebody tells you that they know that, I would question them hard, because I don't believe that. And every day that goes by, there's a new house that's being CO'd, or maybe 10 new houses being CO'd in the city of Northport. So that's why this issue is going to get harder, not easier, as we move forward. And it's going to be hard no matter what. My concern on a regulatory front is that at some point this is going to be mandatory. That's kind of, sort of, you can kind of get that inkling, the legislature did not address agriculture as any issue. I mean, all the stuff that came out of the legislature this year on water quality, none of it's agriculture. Agriculture's got a huge component into the nitrogen into the waterways. Not so much here, to the extent that it comes from someplace. Exactly. But I mean, the Mayaca, Hatchie, and some of those other things, you have some, but the big issue in the city of Northport would be the inputs from septic tank into your waterways that are, they're artificial waterways that you're intersecting the water table.
2 points on that. I know Mr. Swa was talking about using Northport as a test model along the canals. Is that still being worked on?
I believe we're still looking into that, yes.
And the second is that slide that you showed about the drain field. I personally believe there needs to be wood chips under all of the septic tanks, and it's only a 6 to an 8 inch increase because if you look at your slide, it's coming up on the side of that yellow portion. So it's not adding a full
Yeah, but it-
12 inches. But the
But if you look
benefit
at-
for
This-
20 to
this-
30
Look at
years.
That space right there, it's actually 12 inches below the bottom of the yellow is what they're talking about on the wood chips. The wood chip field is broader than the nitrification zone, if you will. But the actual, you need the 12 inches of depth on the wood chips to have grow enough bugs to get rid of, to get rid of the nitrate that hopefully was made in the yellow zone, if you will.
If I ever build a septic tank,
Yeah.
mine will have wood
Yeah.
chips
And
underneath it.
If you guys wanted, if we as a city collectively wanted to do this, it would require us to get into the septic tank business, because the DOH is not requiring that of 99% of the septic tanks that are being built in Northport. Right.
But we as a city can't, help me understand, if this is regulated, if septics are regulated by DOH, and DOH does not require these wood chips, can we as a city require these wood chips to be installed? Or are we now stepping on DOH's toes?
So, I'm sure our city attorney will correct me, but my understanding of the law is you can be more strict than the state law, you can't be more lenient, i.e. the 365. But you can, if you wanted to have a tighter control, you could, you just can't have a looser one.
That's a general statement.
Right.
You have to look at the specific legislation to determine whether or not there's an express or, there can also be, like a constructive preemption if, depending on how the legislation's written, delegating all of that to that department. I just don't know the answer to that question.
So it's something that, because of the broad development that's happening throughout the city and all over the city, and we're focusing on trying to put city water and city sewer in a specific area, meanwhile, the rest of the city is being built out, is this a protective measure possibly that we can implement to say, hey, you're gonna put in a septic, we as a city require you to put in wood chips?
I wouldn't require it. I don't mind at all suggesting or giving them the information, but to require it, as you state, where we'd be in a business. But
Nothing will come of it because it's costly. So you could give them all the information you want, they're not gonna do it because of the costs involved.
well, you'd be surprised how many environmentalists are out there, and if they know that they're going
Commissioner Luke is right. That's my experience too, is that there's a certain percentage of people that will do it just because it's a better thing to do, but that's not the majority.
But if we are intending to help the environment overall, it would seem that we would have to legislate this and say, yes, you have to put in wood chips underneath your septic. I mean, if we're gonna put our money where our mouth is, and we're trying to solve a problem.
Right, so you have to staff it. Yeah, we have to be, that's why I said, we have to be in the septic tank business, and that's what the city
And
manager
now
was
I
saying.
understand what you mean by being in the septic tank business, as far as
Yeah,
the
we're not-
oversight.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't
You're in the
understand that that's.
regulatory framework at that point.
you're stepping out over DOH.
Right.
And
So-
then that, you'd have to have all that regulation and everything upon yourself.
No, and I
Exactly.
get it now, because when you were saying you're in the septic tank business, no, that's not what we're trying to be in.
Right.
We're not trying to be septic tank people, but now I understand the regulatory side of it based on what Assistant City Manager said. Thank you.
Anything else? Ms. Luke?
Not really. I mean, do you need something today? I mean, is this what we're hammering out, or is this another step in the right direction?
Well, I think that there's maybe multiple options in my brain at the moment. One of them, one of the things that we recommended was to move forward with the RFP process to select an engineer to go do a first phase somewhere. We have targeted Madagascar. We could probably broaden that up in a RFP process. And the reason that I would suggest that we move forward with that part of it is because once we have a design ready, and realize if we start today, we're not gonna have a design for probably the better part of 9 months to a year because of the RFP process and then the design process, that we would have a shovel-ready project, and if we have some funding that pops up from DEP or DOH or whoever, that we would be ready to go and we would have a leg up on that side of it. So that piece of it, and then it sounds like there's other work to be done in regards to the part associated with how much do people get back, if there's a proration of, based on how long they've been there, those kinds of things can continue to be worked on, because we're not gonna have a project ready within the next 12 months, and we can figure all that other stuff out in the intervening time frame.
How much is the cost to design and do the permitting and stuff for that project? for Madagascar?
My guess would be $200,000 to $300,000.
But then if we,
Well, I'm getting two different numbers here.
I think it was like,
I have 6 over here and you have 2 here.
It depends on the scope of how big of an area we go.
well, Madagascar
So anywhere
was-
between 2 and 6.
I'm not sure I'm hiring that engineer.
You are talking about the Madagascar area that we had the discussion on back, I think it was in January.
Right.
I think it was, don't quote me on the area, but Elderon, Salford, some waterway, and then 75.
We got maps on that right now. Jennifer's
So-
bringing them.
So you can see
Refresh your
that
refresh your memory on the area, because I kind of forgot where it was for a little bit there
Well, I
myself.
know the area. It
So-
didn't quite go to 75, it was more Sardina, I think is.
Sardinia.
So this engineer designs it. Is he gone after the design, or does he stay on during the entire project?
You could do it both ways, but I mean, a normal, if we're just gonna design and stop at that point, we would probably write that into the RFP. Process design permit, but normally you would have construction as well, construction phase services. We normally do most of those construction phase services. We have on, the staff that inspects and does those kinds of, they do enough to be able to certify the project. But if we don't have an identified project to go build, or the funding to go build an identified project, we would probably not put that in as part of the initial contract.
And somewhere in the discussion, it was talked about $7,000 a year. Is that somebody that oversees the payment process? Is that
My
what we
recollection was that Jen was saying that we have an assessment process, and that costs $7,000 to oversee, but that the recommendation was that we do it internally as we're doing the existing expansion program that was done, and that does not cost $7,000 a year.
Can you further explain that,
Yes,
so I
yes,
can,
ma'am. Mhm.
thank you.
So GSG takes care of all of the correspondence with the tax collector's office. So they submit us the rolls, they manage that, they monitor all of the payoffs and things of that nature that come through the tax roll, and they are the conduit by which we administer that assessment district program.
And you pay them $7,000.
Yes.
Do it in-house?
Well, currently we don't do an assessment district for what we have been doing with our latest pilot project. So if they can't pay or don't want to pay for it all up front, we allow them to pay it over time. There's a payment agreement that comes through between us and the customer, and it's signed off by the city attorney, by the city clerk, and the city manager, and then we put that amount of money on their bill, on their water bill, and they pay it every month. So it's much more convenient for them. It's not on their tax bill, but we actually send them a bill for it. It goes right on their water bill, that they get it.
Process than this $7,000.
Correct, yeah, we don't, correct, yes, there's 2 processes that we use right now, the assessment district and the payment plan option that we have. And we would recommend doing this, continuing through the payment plan option. Haven't really gotten any complaints.
Are we almost done with that assessment part?
Yes,
Or
I believe after this year,
Yep.
we'll have 1 more year.
we need to pay that $7,000?
We've been coming to commission once a year to bring this, I think we're done with 1 more year left.
Good, thank you.
So you want us to come back again for the next 20 years?
There was one more under the payment plans. It says charge is $10 a month for administration.
Yes. Mhm.
So they would be paying some amount monthly,
Correct.
and then they'd have to pay $10 more?
Yes, that's the administration portion of it to help offset the cost so that they are really paying for what the service that they're getting. You know, that amount could be different. You could change that.
In lieu of interest?
So we have,
We're making them do it.
I don't understand that part.
it's the payment plan service that they're getting.
So
So
payment
it's-
plan is for what?
Somebody has to keep track of who owes, how much is owed, if they wanna come in and do a payoff.
Okay, payment for what? Your payment plan for the city water, city sewer project?
Yes.
To keep track of the
So it's
funding?
not gonna be a loan that the homeowner takes out, it's assessed on their bill? Okay.
Basically, we're the bank in this
Okay,
situation.
thank you.
Right.
There's no interest.
There's no interest.
Oh, then there's no fee or anything.
Correct. Yeah, so if they wanted to pay, if they had the cash in hand and they came in, there would be no charge beyond that, other than their monthly water and sewer bill.
Can I put my mortgage on that?
I know, right?
I know for you.
You know some folks?
Jim, did you bring that?
I know some
There
people.
is.
Tell people.
They
Is there
asked
a way to give a 3% discount to somebody who would pay you cash? Could we put that into, like a 3% discount?
We could
We're
work that
looking-
into the,
yeah.
we could look at working that into the line extension
I
part
don't
of
wanna
it.
do an interest thing when we're making somebody do this, I mean, no way. But to pay cash up front, I would, 3% discount, I think. Get 4% if you pay early enough on your property tax, so.
So Commissioner, to circle back, my brain was only doing wastewater again, and the engineering fee that we presented back in January was $750,000 based on that project scope that we had identified back then.
So the design and permitting would be $750,000, and that is for the Madagascar area from Sardina to Eldron, from Salford to some waterway. Is that the project?
Yeah, the 200 and whatever. Right. And it's that 750 would take us through construction as well. That's what, basically, the engineering is based on a percentage of the construction cost.
And through construction is the RFP, helping with the RFP?
The RFP we would develop, and to get the engineer on board.
The actual lines.
The actual construction of
You have to have
the
an
lines.
engineer that
There'd be a-
oversees it.
Right, there'd be a section in there for construction phase services. The RFP we would develop in-house to select an engineer.
I'll pass this around. Like, we only brought one, but that is the area that was selected right there. That's highlighted with the yellow border. The tan colored is existing residences that's already established.
I have it electronically too.
Why is that one lot in that corner, the bottom?
Probably get service from the existing man.
That one.
I don't think they could.
That's enforcement.
Sure, here's the border. It don't encompass that lot.
Off the top of my head, I don't see a reason why I wouldn't. Unless it's served from, on the water side from the existing main, over here from that 12-inch. I don't know. Right, agreed.
Yeah, we can also get that answer and bring it back, or email it.
While you're calculating everything, let's look at that administration to actually
sure that it is an accurate amount.
How many existing,
So if this is gonna be for these 220 parcels, and it's $10 a month, it's 120 a year for 20 years, that $10 fee just seems like excessive. When it's 7,000 for, how many properties did Floribana have?
I don't know off the top of my head how many they started with. Do you know how many they started with?
12 times a year.
Yeah, so,
There's a difference there
I'm
as well.
sorry.
In the Floribana, it was attached to their property tax bill,
Correct.
not coming in every month and paying. So there is a slight difference there.
But you only have to update the tax rolls once a year, right?
These aren't going on the tax rolls.
I understand, but if somebody comes in and sells the property, because this is part of the conversation we had too, was if I have this, where I make my monthly payments to the utilities department, then I sell my house, then the whole thing has to get paid in full.
Correct. Okay, so.
so if that happens and someone has to pay in full, we don't charge them the $10 administrative fee for the rest of the life of the term. We just stop charging them for that. It's only during the time that they actually are borrowing. We've had people prepay quite a bit, and we only charge them that $10 fee up until the time that they. Am I answering your question?
Was there like 83 current residents or something like that? So that's $800 a month that you'd be collecting for admin. I'd just like to know that 800 is actually being spent toward one person or two persons or whatever doing the work.
Just to
Justify it, just make sure it's justified.
I'm all for getting that too.
Yes, ma'am. It is a free loan. They are not being charged any interest at all.
Right.
Can I ask a question about the fees? So when we were talking about the fees and on the wastewater, are these fees, the calculations based on vacuum, or are they based on gravity, sewer?
So these are estimates for the one that you're talking about there.
The 16,000?
The total 16,000. So the top one is for plant capacity fees. That has nothing whatsoever to do with the line extension fee that you're talking about. The only thing that goes, that.
On slide number 8 is what I'm looking at.
I know, I was just looking at it. So. Okay, the line extension fee is the only fee that is intended to recover a portion of the construction cost that you're gonna be doing the line, for the line extensions. Okay, so this is an estimate. This is our best estimate based on what we consider to be the construction costs. And that number could be lower, it could be higher. When we did the water plant, the pilot project, and we came up with that $3,500, that was developed by an engineer that we had hired, and they looked at how much would it cost to extend water throughout the city, and then they divided it by the number of parcels that we have to serve, left to serve. So there are different ways to develop that fee. 10,000 is about what we said it would cost to construct the lines to those parcels. I believe you were looking at the force main, using the gravity system when we developed that number. So it could be lower when they actually go in and do that analysis on what would it cost. I can tell you this much, the $3,500 that we came up with for the water line did not recover all of the costs to complete the pilot project.
So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this estimate is on the low side.
It could be.
We just don't
have that, we do not have that information yet. I mean, we don't even really, I mean, this is based on staff's estimates of what the cost could be to extend services into that little area. But when we developed the line extension fee for the water, it was not just for one area, it was for everyone. So you're looking at averaging costs. It's gonna be cheaper for some than others. So you're looking at trying to develop what the average cost is to extend services.
City manager, do you happen to know how much we have in funding for these expansion needs in utilities fund reserves?
Reserves?
Or, how much has been saved so far for expansion needs? And what is available? I mean, I think I'd like to know what's available now.
Their reserves are work very differently than everybody else's. They have bond covenants they have to meet, they have all kinds of rules. It's basically, I mean, I'd have to look at it, I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Because I'd be interested in knowing how much have we put aside for the past 5 years, maybe 10 years, for expansion needs versus what we put out. Because I know we've done a lot of looping projects and stuff like that, but, which would, in my mind, be expansion projects. So I'd be curious to know what have we put aside, what's still there, what projects have been done. Because if we're planning for the future, I want to know how we planned in the past for the future, if that makes any sense.
May I ask a question on that? You're referring to our utility fund balance, or are you referring to what monies have been set aside for expansion projects? What monies have been set aside?
Well, it's utilities, isn't it?
Well, the funding that we've been.
Very different though. What she asked for is some clarification is, are you looking have we reserved any portion of fund balance for this? And I believe the answer to that is no. But we have like this program right here where we put money in surtax for neighborhood expansion programs.
Okay, so this is only going to be with surtax. There has been, from what I just heard, was nothing has been set aside to plan for the future outside of funding for surtax.
Correct.
So maybe what then I need is, thank you for that clarification, is what has been set aside for surtax for the past, what was it, 10 years or so that surtax funding has been used for water projects? What is that amount?
Can I add to this, because I just want clarification about you guys. It's sounding like you're almost a nonprofit. You take in and you put out. And it sounds like your pretty much sole source is surtax. And then the usage that people use comes in, goes out. You don't really have a collection or way to collect more than that?
We are, yes, I mean, we are
Capacity.
supposed to break even. That's what our goal is. You know,
So
utilities are very capital intensive animals. They need to be funded. We're not funding future, we're not funding expansion of the system, but we're funding the plants to be able to continue to expand.
That's important to understand. So this line extension fee, whatever it is, this one says 10,000, that is because utilities, the city utilities, does not gather money to go out and do this for the future. Everybody pays their part of that line to have it extended to their home.
Correct.
Or their commercial.
Yes.
I understand you guys more now.
And the plant,
These special little people.
and the plant capacity fee is exactly the same way, only it's your little corner of the
It's a
plant.
little straw.
Yeah.
That part I totally.
I understood, but the whole enchilada?
Well, because if you think about that from a existing customer standpoint, see, if you were gonna fund expansions, i.e. taking it out to new areas with the existing ratepayers funding that, then the existing guys pay for their line and their future neighbor's line.
This is why the state and the federal grants are so vitally important.
Yep.
that's about the only way that you can plan and design.
Yeah. Well, that's why most utilities are are that way, and that the developers wind up paying the freight on that service to new areas for that very reason. And the federal money was really around in the 70s and 80s, right after the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. There was tons and tons of federal money, and that spigot's really dried up.
And that's why we're in the shape we're in all over the United States.
And
The infrastructure has not been addressed.
Right. And then the state level is really kind of reactive. They've reacted now, and we'll see what kind of funding is gonna come through for the septic to sewers. I mean, the state has recognized the springs as, from an environmental perspective, and they're funding some septic to sewer systems in those areas. And my hope is that there's significantly more dollars in that particular type of program. You know, our springs would not, Warm Mineral Springs is the only spring, quote unquote, around here. But those water bodies that are around here are just as important to me as the springs.
Let's look at wrap up. We have a direction to give them.
Yeah, I just would like to get a consensus, Mayor, to see if they could bring back the breakdown of the surtax money that we received for like the past 10 years and projects that the surtax has used in the past 10 years.
I mean, to me, it's within the budget because they don't do anything outside of the budget, so.
Yeah, I've just been looking for the numbers in one sheet of paper.
I don't have a problem with it.
Which, me too, that's fine.
And
So that's a
then
unanimous consensus.
if you could give us an update on the complicated fund balance for utilities, how much is there, if that could be part of it.
Well,
As far as this $10,000 thing, I will admit I'm torn on that, or any money is given, because we have many people that are building houses that are connecting to city water and city sewer because it's available. And they have to come, and I'm not talking about in the after 72 developments, I'm talking about the ones that are before 72 developed parcels. They're not getting that in 70. And I have a little bit of heartburn when you're giving to one and you're not giving to the other, and it's not an equal benefit. So
May I reply to that?
Yeah.
So our thought process on this was that I agree that, you do have to try to be as even as you can, but you have already put in a well and a septic tank. You've already gone through that expense of doing that. And that was the point of trying to give them some kind of incentive, because you've already made that investment, right?
That 10,000 mark, that 10,000 mark kind of takes care of that line extension fee because it wasn't available prior to. So I can see where you guys came up with that 10,000.
January meeting, you asked for ways to take care of the existing homes, not the new ones. We all pretty much seem to all agree on all new construction. But your concern, and our concerns too, was with the existing folks that are already there, how to best ease the burden on them. And that's the way we came up with that.
The mandatory hookup, are we going to stick with the 365 for the city water? Obviously, the state is saying you have to for the city sewer, but the city water, is that something we're going to be looking at some point of saying, well, you might want to, you might not?
That was one of the things that Mike Acosta talked about, is doing the hybrid portion of it, where, okay, something goes wrong with your well.
Now's the time.
That's, no ifs or buts about it.
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner,
Have
Mayor.
you talked with DOH to see if they would work with us on that kind of thing, or is DOH not wanting to get involved? That would seem like something would have to be addressed with DOH.
There's no question that some would have to be addressed, so that we would, and no, we have not touched base with them. But we have a pretty good working relationship with those folks, so I'm pretty optimistic that that could happen.
I'd like to hear their input on that, what the city water, if
if we run the lines and the well isn't broke, so you don't have to hook in, but once the line gets broke, your well dries or you want to, because you don't want to put in a reverse osmosis or whatever reason, is DOH gonna work with us? Because if we're looking to come up with some kind of a plan, this is a very integral piece of the puzzle that we need to have an answer to, I would think. Because DOH is answers to the state, they don't. So I would like to see their input on this.
So a commission, do we want to go with the recommended proposition here?
Can we get a consensus to have DOH's answer on the water part of it?
I think it's irrelevant, Commissioner Lee.
They're gonna have to work with them, yeah, anyhow, so.
Not if, the only way they'll work with them is if we say, hey, we're not gonna make it mandatory for 365, we're gonna extend the hookup for water. But if they have to apply for a new well, DOH then has to work with the city to say,
No, you
yes,
gotta hook up.
yeah, they have to work.
Yeah, well, that'll happen,
Communication.
yeah, I mean,
No,
that'll
it's
happen
not.
whenever we get there, though.
Because they don't have it
It'll be
mandatory.
Yeah, that would be necessary on our side.
To do that, I guess.
Because water would be available now.
But they're not gonna come to us
Right.
unless we tell them. We
Exactly.
want them to
Right.
come, you know what I mean?
We want them to come
But
to
in
us,
order
so
for
we
that-
have to have
But in
someone
order
say
for
that
that
they
hybrid
want
to work,
You have to communicate with them, otherwise it
Exactly.
won't. So if we accept the hybrid, the way it was said, or what was proposed here, well, then that would be necessary for them to do.
That's the way I see it.
Well, let's get our consensus on that. Do we want to go with the hybrid, the proposed hybrid that staff has suggested? Commissioner Emmerich, I'm a yes. Commissioner Luke?
Yes, with the other information that
Yeah,
they're
the
looking
stuff we've
into
already
to
asked.
bring back, yes.
McDowell?
So the hybrid is for just the water portion,
Mhm.
yeah.
it can't be for the, can't be for
You
the
can't.
sewer. Okay, I just wanna make sure.
So that means the bullet point 2 has to be
Exactly.
struck.
Right.
Exactly. Yes, I'm for that.
Okay, there we go. We have our consensus. Is there anything else?
I do have one question on that, because I believe Mr. Acosta said something about you can't make a change when they're selling the property?
No. I've just, my brain, my wife happens to be a marketing person for an attorney that does land, closings and those kinds of things. So it kind of gets beaten into my brain about certain things kind of every night. So, so the concern, the quote-unquote unintended consequence is if you have this load of that is out there for whatever the number is, say, let's say it's $8,000 on the water side, and somebody has to pay that upon transfer of the property, even though the well may still be good. Do we, that has an effect on the sale of that property in all likelihood.
I don't know, I think I would suggest it at the failures, just because everything's gonna fail at some point.
At some point, you're going to have to do something with it. And
To me, that is the most fair way to do that across the board.
No, because if you sell the property, hear me out on this, because if I buy your property, you have well and septic that has not been hooked up to the city water and city sewer that is now there, and I buy the property, I have to pay that amount, it's paid off in a 30-year installment. So it becomes part of my mortgage. So what I would be paying to the city is we'll call it $100 a month, call it for the sake of argument. Whereas in my mortgage over 30 years, it's probably $40.
So, in your scenario, you would put it on the buyer, not the seller.
Well, that would be
As long
negotiated.
as long as you're okay with that.
Well, I think the negotiation would come through at the time of sale, negotiation, and they could do a 50-50, it doesn't have to be on one.
Property changes
Okay.
title.
I'm just,
I don't care who
I
pays
am
for it
totally
on that
fine with either way.
private negotiation.
Right, I guess my
But
thought
when
is,
it comes to the,
The-
when the sale of the property happens, the city is getting their money, because we're trying to do this again for another parcel, another area.
I guess my thought is, if I have a house here that's on water, I got a house across the street that's not, and both houses are for sale, the additional
I
cost
understand
on the
that.
house that doesn't have it would put it out of market to the one across the street, even though that they're valued the same, relative.
No, they're
And
not
so-
valued the same.
Well, they are, they're valued according to their area, right? So both houses, all being relatively equal, will be valued approximately, say, 150, 200,000. Whether this one needs that extra 8 grand or 10 grand, or whether it doesn't, the value of the property is gonna be the value of the property, but this person's gonna have to pay that additional $10,000 at the buy of the sale. So instead of me paying that extra 10, both houses are relative, I like them both, I'm just gonna choose this one because it's an extra $10,000 less. That was where I was coming at with it being a little more equitable at the sale. Is if you get rid of the sale aspect, everything's gonna fail at some point. This house here, I can buy this house with the same price, I'm gonna buy this one, but I choose this one. In 7 years, the well may fail, and at that point, I have to be on city water, or my sewer, or my septic. At that point, I have to hook up, everything's there. But it wouldn't affect the sale of both properties, all things being equal. That was my thinking.
But wastewater, you have to hook up within a year.
365. Well, I mean, yeah, all right,
So
so
you
then it
may
would
as
apply
well
to the
just-
water. Well, then it would apply to the water.
Yeah. So it goes back to, at the sale, the city should get their money. Because the other thing is, I wanted to say, is that $10,000 incentive, is that only if you hook up for wastewater? Is it only if you hook up for water? Or is it only if you hook up for both at the same time?
I think staff would recommend that it would be both.
Exactly. So but I think we need to give that direction, that $10,000 incentive within the 1 year is for both. That's what I would think you guys need that direction on.
Well, I definitely would want to go for both. I don't want to.
Well, I don't want it to
I
be
wanna-
assumed either.
Yes, I want to encourage both. I don't want to encourage one over the other.
So, is it?
In the scenario that Mayor was talking about, you made very good sense. Either the buyer is gonna have to pay that close to 10,000, or the seller is going to be offering it at the closing to pay for
I'm
it.
going to be on the house across the street with a sign that says you don't have to pay that here.
Exactly. So one
That's what I'm gonna do.
or the other is gonna be losing the 10,000 at that point. And it does make a difference in the sale and the value of the home.
But at the same time, the flip side is that somebody may go, you know what, I don't wanna have to deal with this, it's already dealt with, and I'll pay the little extra for it.
Well, because eventually the other
'Cause
house
then
is
the
gonna
other-
have to
eventually
hook
it's
up,
gonna be-
and it's
have
gonna
to
cost
hook
them
up.
10 grand down the
Right,
road
my
to
thought
hook
would
up
be, all right, well,
eventually.
if it goes out 7 years down the road, then that's when I'll deal with it.
And it's 7
That-
years more the cost.
That could very well be, that's
So there's both sides of the argument on that one.
So really, it just sounds like we need to decide whether or not we want to make it part of the sale or whether we don't.
Yeah, and we also need to address the incentive if it's.
So all those in favor of making it part of the sale, say aye.
Aye.
Those say no. No. So I guess it doesn't be part of the sale.
No.
All right, so we won't make it a part of the sale.
Will you, can we take motions?
Well, this is a
Doesn't work.
direction, this would be a
It's okay.
direction, yeah.
As a consensus, or a failure to achieve consensus.
We need a consensus on that $10,000 incentive if it's for both water and sewer.
I would suggest you wait on that one. I don't know if that's appropriate, because as Jen said, that's an estimate, and we're gonna come back to you once the system is designed with that exact number. Okay,
Right.
okay, I'm sorry, I concur.
Whatever
It's not
that
about the dollar
number-
amount.
Whatever the amount may be.
I think they can get a $10,000 for water, and a month, 10 months later, go ahead and check in again and get another 10. Right, so
All
it's,
those in favor of combining that 10,000, or whatever that line extension fee is, to both water and sewer, say
It's
Aye.
within 365.
Those opposed, say
Yes.
no. Sounds like that passed unanimously as a consensus.
I'm just checking. The $750,000 design permitting, do you need a consensus on that too?
Of course, we will come back with a contract on it, but yes.
Estimated to be about
Yes.
$750,000 for design and permitting.
Yes.
Well, I think that what we're looking for is to move forward with the RFP process, and then obviously the contract at some point would come back to you.
So those in favor of that, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Passes unanimously on that consensus.
And that was just for Sardina.
Yes.
That,
Yeah. But they'll also be tasked with trying to help us develop that fee we were just talking about.
We'd be able to utilize.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Using the city for the monthly payments to their customers.
We can use them.
It says here, continue to allow monthly payments for the existing customers.
Up to the 20 years.
Maximum up to 20 years.
That was suggested. Those in favor, say aye.
Is that,
Wait,
is
say
that
that.
what
Yeah, this was their suggestion, was
Putting a maximum of 20 years on the
city
on
being
the
the bank?
line extension fee. So us being the bank.
The last one that went out, it didn't have a maximum, so they can pay what and when they want.
Right.
And that's.
so
the
putting
city
an
being
end
the
game.
bank.
Great idea.
So basically, it's
I
the
like
city.
putting an end game on it, but I would like to know how much they would have to pay monthly. Those 20 years.
72.50 over 20 years.
If the estimate,
Right.
right. Mhm.
You'll get that number when we bring this back, we'll have better estimates.
$72.50 for the payment, $10 more for the admin fee. So you're looking at $82.50. Then they're gonna have their water and sewer bill on top of that.
Another $100, give or take, $80 or so.
Yeah, you're close to 200.
160-ish.
What you're capable.
What if we put the 20 years at 30 years?
I was thinking 30 because
'Cause that's-
some mortgages go to 30
Because
years.
there's an
Mortgages
end
are
game in
typically-
there, that's really,
And to me, the mortgage.
They're kind of around 30. People grasp that better.
Okay,
right.
so
I was thinking 25 or 30 is what I was thinking, 30.
30. No,
I prefer the 30. I mean, when you're looking at 82.50, of course, your mind goes to that $100 mark. We've got a lot of families.
yeah, we do a lot of
Whole lot of
seniors,
families.
retirees.
So,
This is real money to real people that has to be taken into account. And I still trying to understand the actual overall city benefit for this, in this area. I go back to.
You have to envision that environmental benefit that's very fuzzy.
There's no, exactly, it's extremely fuzzy.
So commissioners, can I get a consensus to raise that from 20 years to 30 years? Those in
Yes.
favor say aye.
Yes,
Those opposed say no.
and that's the city being the bank kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
that is unanimously,
There's your end
we have a
game.
unanimous consensus of end game at 30.
Thank you.
Okay, continue to use the funding with surtax dollars. I can't answer that until I see what those past
Well, this next RFP that we're going out is intended to use surtax dollars to do the design, so I just.
Oh, okay.
So,
We don't use those dollars.
so those.
That's the only money we do for this.
Those.
They're so small, we may even not even get an outhouse done.
Those in favor, say aye. Those opposed say no. That consensus is unanimous. About it, isn't it?
Yeah, because we're gonna have them come back with that offset amount of money,
I
so.
think that's about it for what you needed for today.
Today, yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then everything else we can work out when we come back with things.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, do we have any, yes, sir. You wanna say something?
I just, in closing, I know this was hard. Like I said in the beginning, thank you for for the sake of doing what was hard to make something right. Vice Mayor, I think I'm going to send you this. Yes, ma'am, I will. It's make quite a bit of sense on what you folks gotta go through to make these decisions. It's hard enough for us to put the presentations together, but for this group here, the commission, to make that final decision, it's tough and it's hard. So thank you for.
Part of the toughness is our hands are tied by state. I mean, yeah, those are hard decisions to make, but when you realize the state forces you to make a decision in one direction or the other, it lessens that toughness to it because we're preempted with stuff.
Can I back up a second? Because I just want to make sure, I think I'm going to be changing my vote to proceed with this RFP thing. And here's why. I go back to what I said initially. That money that we would be spending out of surtax to do this design and permitting costs, we could be using to be running those lines to the commercial properties. And until I have the dollar amounts for running those lines to the commercial properties, I don't want to take the money that could have been used for something citywide benefit for an area of 225 parcels, of which there's, what, 81 homes on it? Okay, so basically, we're spending $750,000 to design and permit for 88 homes without the thought that nothing else is going to be developed at that point. So we're spending so much, we're spending $100,000 basically a home for design and permitting, when we could be using that money for the commercial extensions.
Well, what we gather and learn from this benefit us in the future too.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, because you're talking about you're gonna get figures that we can use throughout the city through this process. So we won't have to, in essence, dig as deep every time we move forward.
Right.
So those costs will be saved moving forward, those design costs.
And we can't use surtax money for commercial.
Well, they could make a decision collectively to use the surtax money for anything they wanted.
Exactly.
They can redirect it, you know.
You, Rick.
What I was bringing up was what was approved.
But on the
I
ballot,
don't
right.
know that answer. I don't, and Mr. Costa, you're absolutely right. It's not an either or until I get the answer about the commercial properties.
So you'll have another bite of the apple when we come back with that RFP.
But technically, no, because you've got 750.
The RFP will come back to you all as a contract.
As a contract.
Okay.
So,
So it's a
if
contract,
comes
okay.
back and, you know, 6 months from now, or whatever that time frame is, and you don't approve it, then we stop right there.
And you'll have the information about those commercial properties, because I don't want to spend.
How much is in the kitty?
Yeah, right, okay.
So, Commissioner.
I'm fine.
All right, so you're gonna keep your vote with the
I'm
consensus?
gonna keep it that way. I
For the
just
record.
wanted
All right.
to
Yep.
make sure
Makes
that,
Sorry, no surtax.
yeah, I don't want to, well, you did it once already
I
on the
know.
dais.
Yes.
All right, great. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Commissioner Luke? Anything, little communication, anything that you have?
I got a little happy note. I had an individual who moved out off of Biscayne in one of the Habitat for Humanity homes. Comcast actually ended up providing service. I mean, that is very highly unusual, that Comcast, I mean, she went through the mill. They're telling her, yes, you can connect, no, you can't, yes, you can, no, you can't. But finally succeeded to get Comcast to actually provide internet in an area where it hasn't been being provided, so happy note.
Or, I mean, Commissioner
Nah,
McDowell?
I've got nothing now.
I have nothing, Commissioner Lynch.
Not a thing.
I'm good, thanks.
City Attorney?
Thank you
I'm
very
not
much
letting
for
you
all the
guys talk
steps.
anymore.
Thank you very much
I'm
for your
I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Appreciate all your
Meeting is adjourned.
information.
Thank you very much.
We still got it.
Of course.